Okay, how's this? Jimmy Jordan is the bestest, most effective member of Congress ever. And he's so interesting, too. He can be my wrestling coach any day of the week. So I obviously don't know who the next House Speaker is going to be, but sometime in the coming days or weeks, hopefully not before you see this anyhow, someone will be elected Speaker. And I think, at least I think they will. And that person is going to get a lot of attention from the press, including in the form of a genre known as the beet sweetener. Okay, what is a beet sweetener? I will tell you, but first let's zoom out a little bit, because beet sweeteners are a particularly controversial form of a larger method, which is also controversial, called access journalism. In some ways, beet sweeteners are the on-ramp to access journalism. So access journalism, as many of you probably already knew, is an approach to journalism, particularly political journalism, where reporters, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, get really cozy with their sources. This can happen subconsciously over time. You cover someone or some office long enough, you get to know the people you're covering a little. Suddenly, it becomes hard to keep an adversarial distance. They're coming to you with information because they think you'll help them, and you're counting on them to keep you competitive with scoops. It can also happen intentionally. You, the journalist, want some newsmaker to know who you are, think well of you, think you might be sympathetic in some sense, and so you ingratiate yourself. Maybe you even pull some punches or publish a piece that's critical of something or someone that that particular newsmaker doesn't like. So my apologies, the sausage making, it can be a little gross. But I do want to say that as bad as it sounds, access journalism isn't just about cynicism or blind ambition. It can be useful, particularly if it's only one tool in the reporter's toolkit. Because the flip side of being credulous here and there is that you're there when important shit happens. When things go wrong, or when something that isn't supposed to be public slips out, and suddenly, bam, you can trade in all that access for a big, important story. The Trump years were a feeding frenzy of access journalism for a number of reasons, and it was often really poorly concealed and pretty gross. At least that's what sources close to Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner tell me. But it was also kind of inevitable. The Trump administration was filled with warring factions and power-drunk cynics. It was a whole festival of backbiters with bad motives. So they'd just talk. They'd share things that other administrations would think better of saying out loud. And they'd dole out exclusive information, some of it true, a lot of it bullshit, to jockey for position within their own workplace. And so journalists were there to receive it. And then they were able to paint damning portraits of a dysfunctional, incompetent White House. So it's a transaction, and it can be a positive sum thing, or it can be zero sum. The journalist with access wins, the rest of us lose. And the problem is that journalists aren't always the best judges of their own transactionality. Like all humans, they can convince themselves that something they're doing for selfish reasons is actually for the greater good. Which brings us back to beet sweeteners. So beet sweeteners are like step one of this process. It's kind of comparable to bringing a fruit basket to a new neighbor or something, except it's because your neighbor has a pool and you want to swim in their pool. And you'll find these beet sweeteners all over mainstream news media whenever some flashy new politician or aide emerges on the scene, or an underdog candidate launches a presidential campaign, or when someone goes from being a relative nobody to becoming Speaker of the House. Anything like that happens, and it serves as kind of like a bat signal to certain political reporters. So call that person up, show up at their office, get some interviews done, and then start working on a soft touch profile. Then after it runs and paints them in a good light, they'll be grateful, and maybe, hopefully, they'll feel like they owe you one. So it's the opposite of a hatchet job. It's just thinly disguised flattery, and it happens every time someone reaches the threshold of power and influence. These sorts of pieces run everywhere, but they're particularly tempting to the hyper beltway focused newspapers, rags, newsletters, the outlets that really thrive on being up powerful people's asses all the time. And so my humble prediction is you'll be treated to a few beet sweeteners in the coming weeks or months, just as soon as Republicans get their act together and make the great Jimmy Jordan the next House Speaker. The beet. It's so sweet.